beginning of the movie, a girl named Jana is seen running through the jungle in a panic. She reaches a building and enters through a chained, locked door. Hiding behind a door, she checks something on her phone. Suddenly, she hears a noise from outside and looks through the gap in the door hinge. Suddenly, a door slams shut, and a man named Kevin appears, saying, "There you are." He demands her phone. Jana responds, "Let me delete it first." Kevin forcefully tries to snatch the phone from her, but two others, Ron and Julie, attempt to stop him. Just then, they hear the sound of a piano playing. They cautiously move forward. As they pass a room, Kevin hears a sound coming from an old Almira. He goes inside to check, and as he gets closer, the noise from inside grows louder. Nervously, he opens the door, and a flock of bats flies out, knocking him backward. Startled, he quickly shuts the door. Meanwhile, the other three people reach a room with a piano. Julie lifts the piano's key flap and finds a mouse inside. Ron examines the piano and remarks, "It's damaged. How is it even playing?" As they begin to leave, the piano keys press down on their own. Hearing the noise, Julie turns back in shock. Meanwhile, as Kevin prepares to leave, the wardrobe door creaks open on its own. Suddenly, he is forcefully pulled back inside. A car is then seen driving toward Murden Mansion, where Nick and Paul are introduced. Nick remarks, "I was expecting someone from your team." Paul responds, "I wanted to come since I know this place." Nick remarks, "Really? You haven't been here for years." Paul replies, "Well, I'm here now. Aren't you happy to see your buddy?" Nick responds, "Of course, buddy." Nick then informs Paul, "The body was picked up yesterday. Local kids hang around this building. God knows why." Paul says, "We were exactly the same back then. Remember how we got stuck in here with Sophie and that other guy?" Nick replies tersely, "I'd rather forget that." He then unlocks the door. Paul continues, "I read in the file that these kids also heard the whispers, just like we did back then." Nick dismisses it. "That was just an accident." "That's it," Paul insists, "but there are similarities. Same place. The whisper. What if they found the—" Nick cuts him off. "We have a murder case here. Let's not mix it up with old stories." Paul agrees, saying, "Show me where the body was found." As they enter, the scene transitions to the past, where a boy named Arthur tells a group of kids, "This mansion has been abandoned for almost 100 years. The last person who lived here was the old whisperer. She never left this place until she died." He continues, "The old woman lived on the second floor. She healed people with her incantations and was paid handsomely. The money is definitely hidden here somewhere." Young Nick says, "Arthur, these are just stories. Even if the money was there, someone must have already taken it." Arthur insists, "No one knows about it." Young Sophie counters, "Then how do you know?" Arthur replies confidently from the library, "There's a secret archive about the mansion." Nick's brother Tommy stops Nick, saying, "This place is bad. Mom said we should not go here." Nick shouts at him and forcefully drags him along. They all head upstairs. Arthur examines his map and spots a specific tile on the floor. He quickly pries it open, revealing a jute pouch inside. The group grows excited as Arthur opens it to find a box. Young Paul asks, "What is this?" Arthur explains, "It's a phonograph, the first recording device." Paul opens it, and they hear faint whispers emanating from within. Arthur, visibly nervous, says, "I think it's her whisper. She must have recorded it to preserve them." Sophie inspects it closely, but suddenly sees a reflection in the mirror and stumbles back in shock. The scene cuts to the present as Nick shows Paul where the body was found. Nick says the kids reported it 7 hours after the death. Paul asks, "What about the kids?" Nick replies, "I know them personally. They're good kids. They couldn't have done this." The scene then shifts to Paul stopping his car by the jungle road and picking up a keychain from the woods. In a flashback, Paul drives with his son Luke when he hallucinates a kid in front of the car. Panicked, he swerves and crashes into a tree. He checks behind for Luke, but ahead, sees him lying all injured. In the present, Paul returns with Luke's keychain and again sees a kid outside. He gets out of the car to check, but finds nothing, and then leaves. Paul arrives at a house, where Jana opens the door, and another woman comes from behind. It's Sophie. Sophie greets him, asking how he's doing and why he disappeared. Paul replies, "I got busy, and then it just felt awkward." Sophie asks, "So, are you married? Any kids?" Paul answers, "A son." Sophie says, "I have 3. Paul asks, "Was that your eldest at the door?" Sophie replies, "No, she's my stepdaughter, Jana." Paul responds, "Yes, Nick told me about your husband's death." Sophie says. It was this March, a heart attack. The scene cuts to Paul interrogating the kids. He asks, "You told the police you heard a whisper before Kevin died. Where was it coming from?" Ron responds, "It sounded like it was everywhere." Paul continues, "Did you notice anyone else? Maybe someone following you?" Julie replies, "There was no one except us." Paul asks, "By any chance, did you find a small box?" Ron says, "The piano started playing on its own." Jana interrupts, "Some creep was watching me a couple of days ago. I was walking down the street and he was just standing there, watching me. Then I saw him at school. I felt uneasy, yelled at him, and he ran off. I just realized he might have been in the mansion that night." Paul asks her to describe the man. She says, "He wears glasses. He's a historian, and people call him King Arthur." Hearing this, Paul quickly leaves. Paul arrives at a location and knocks on the door. It creaks open on its own. Drawing his gun, he cautiously steps inside and scans the surroundings. Suddenly, a man appears from behind. Paul introduces himself. The man responds, "Sorry, I thought you were a thief." Then he asks, "What do you want?" Paul states, "The mansion, the old witch, the whispers, and the phonograph." He continues, 20 years ago, you took us to that mansion, Arthur." Paul presses further, "You followed the girl. You saw her and her friends go to the mansion. You attacked the teenager, didn't you?" Arthur denies the accusation. Paul insists, "They heard a whisper, just like we did back then." "You found the phonograph, Arthur. Give it to me." Arthur replies, "I don't have it. I have no idea where it is. I haven't seen it since." He opens the door and gestures for Paul to leave. Paul shuts the door and says firmly, "Either you give me the phonograph or you go to jail." Arthur protests, "For what?" "You can't do that. You know me. We were friends." Paul responds, "I never liked you. Jail or the phonograph. Your choice." Arthur relents. "It's upstairs," he says, motioning for Paul to wait. He heads upstairs to retrieve it. As Paul waits, he hears a sudden noise from above. Alarmed, he rushes upstairs and looks out the window and sees Arthur escaping. The scene shifts to a hospital, where a doctor informs Paul Kevin died of fear. Something scared him so badly that his heart gave out. This usually happens in older patients, but I've never seen it in someone so young. Also, his eardrums are ruptured. He continues, "It usually happens due to extremely loud noises, but the witnesses only mentioned whispers." Paul asks, "Can I see his belongings?" Doctor questions, "Are you looking for something specific?" Paul suggests, "Maybe an old wooden box." The doctor says, "I'll need to check the inventory list," and leaves the room. Paul turns his attention to Kevin's body, examining it closely. Suddenly, his phone rings. As he turns to answer the call, the body moves. Alarmed, Paul glances back, but everything appears normal. Moments later, Kevin's head turns suddenly. Paul, on edge, moves closer to investigate. Without warning, Kevin grabs Paul and says, "I know who you are, Paul," then pushes him back. Terrified, Paul stares in disbelief. The scene shifts to a police investigation at Arthur's place. As officers comb through the area, Paul notices a roadmap pinned to a board and discreetly takes it with him. Nick enters and confronts Paul. "You're not in charge here," Paul responds. "I almost caught a suspect." Nick questions, "Arthur? What does he have to do with this?" Paul replies, "Don't worry. If there's no connection, I'll just talk to him." Nick says, "You're drunk and on duty." "What's wrong with you, Paul?" Paul snaps back, "I don't need your concern. Get to work and put Arthur on the wanted list." Later, Jana is babysitting Willie. She hands him a teddy bear to play with and goes to prepare his milk. Suddenly, the teddy bear says, "I love you." Surprised, Jana picks it up and places it on the table. As she feeds Willie his milk, the teddy bear speaks again, "I love you." Confused, Jana presses the button on the toy, and the same phrase plays. To stop it, she removes the batteries, but once again, the teddy bear eerily repeats, "I love you." Suddenly, a shadow moves behind the curtain. In the mirror, a figure is seen walking. Frantic knocking echoes from the door. Terrified, Jana freezes. The door bursts open, and Sophie steps inside, finding Willie crying. Sophie yells angrily, "Can't you see he's crying?" Jana insists, "I need to talk to you." Sophie snaps, "I'm already late because of you. We'll talk tomorrow." Jana agrees. Later, Paul is seen driving alone. He hears a noise from back seat. He turns to see a kid with a distorted face. Paul jolts awake. It was just a nightmare. Disturbed, he decides to visit a nearby bar. Inside, he notices Sophie working behind the counter. He offers, "Have a drink with me." Sophie replies, "I'm working." Paul quips, "I want to tell anyone." Sophie agrees. Sophie gently asks, "Why are you drinking?" "Is everything okay?" Paul responds, "I don't even know where to start. My wife left me and my son is very sick." Sophie asks, "What's wrong with him?" Paul reveals he is in a coma, ventilated. "It's been 2 months. We had an accident driving here." In flashback, a police officer tells Paul, "You said a boy ran out onto the road, but there's nothing on the dashcam." Sophie comforts him. Just then, Paul notices the bracelet on her wrist. Sophie reminds him gently that he gave this bracelet to her. Paul says, "Of course, I spent my months of pocket money to get this." Sophie asks, "Why did we grow apart?" And a silence follows. Later that night, Ron and Julie are seen making out. Julie suddenly pulls away and asks Ron to stop. Ron asks, "What's wrong?" Julie replies, "Our friend just died." Ron responds, "I am going home then." Julie asks, "Seriously? Is that all we can do together? Are you just going to leave me alone?" "I am scared." Ron shrugs. "It's your choice." Julie snaps, "Fine, go," and walks away. Ron goes to drink water when he hears Julie's voice calling. He turns, confused. "Come here," the voice repeats. He questions, "What are you doing down there?" Julie replies, "I am waiting. Come and see." As he steps inside, the door slams shut behind him. He switches on the light, but hears an unsettling noise as the bulb goes out. Grabbing a flashlight, Ron scans the dark space. A mannequin startles him, but he presses forward, spotting a figure standing with his back turned. He calls nervously, "Kevin, is that you?" Moving closer, he realizes it's just another mannequin. Suddenly, the eerie buzz of insects fills the air. Ron turns to see another figure draped in black. He pulls back the cover to reveal yet another mannequin. Blood begins dripping from above. Ron looks up, horrified to see a blood stain on the ceiling surrounded by swarming insects. Without warning, a sewing machine starts on its own, running noisily before abruptly stopping. Ron's flashlight falls on Kevin standing eerily still, but suddenly his head turns. The scene abruptly shifts as Jana jolts awake from her nightmare. She hears the buzz of an insect coming from beneath her bed. Bending down to check, a hand suddenly grabs her hand. Sophie rushes into the room. Sophie calms Willie and scolds Jana for waking him. Later, Paul visits Jana and asks gently, "How are you?" Jana replies, "Does it matter?" Paul reassures her, "Sophie is not angry at you. She just has a lot going on right now." Jana protests, "She doesn't care about me." Paul insists, "That's not true. You are important to her." Jana confesses, "She wants me to think of her as a mother, but she'll never be like my mom." Paul agrees, "No one can replace your mom." "What was she like?" Jana reminisces, "Kind. Before bed, she would always ask about my day. If it wasn't good, she'd hug me and we'd talk. But with Sophie, it's like I don't exist. She never talks to me, never protects me." Paul inquires gently, "Protects you from what?" Jana says, "Julie." Paul asks, "Did Julie hurt you?" Jana falls silent. Paul assures her, "You can trust me, Jana." "What exactly happened in the mansion that night?" Jana says, "Julie found my diary where I wrote that I like Kevin." In a flashback, Jana is seen with Kevin. Kevin says, "I thought you would never come." Jana replies, "I wasn't sure if I should." Kevin responds, "I've always liked you. I just never had the courage to tell you." Jana asks, "Why now?" Kevin admits, "Julie showed me your diary." Shocked, Jana exclaims, "What? She stole my diary?" Kevin brushes it off, saying, "Now we know the feeling is mutual." He then asks, "Will you be my girlfriend?" and leans in to kiss her. Suddenly, Kevin takes out his phone and snaps a photo of Jana. Startled, Jana snaps back, "What are you doing? Delete it now." Just then, Julie and Ron join them, teasing Jana by saying lines from her personal diary aloud. Jana tries to snatch Kevin's phone, but he pushes her away. Determined, she manages to grab the phone and runs into the woods. The others chase after her. Breathing heavily, Jana hides behind a tree, but soon hears faint whispers all around her. Suddenly, the phone rings and she runs deeper into the woods. Back in the present, Jana confides in Paul, "I never wanted Kevin to die." Paul gently comforts her and asks, "You said Arthur was following you. Are you certain he was at the mansion that night?" Jana replies, No. Why? Paul explains. He found a phonograph. It's a recording device, like a music box. I need that for something, Jana says. I didn't see anything like that, Paul reassures her. Get some rest before leaving. Later that night, Sophie shows Paul their old photographs. One thing leads to another, and they begin kissing. Meanwhile, in her room, Jana brushes her hair. Suddenly, the door creaks open behind her. Alarmed, she gets up cautiously and moves forward to investigate. A shadow appears on the door. Back in Paul's room, he turns in his sleep, startled by the sight of Sophie's half-burned face. Sophie reassures him, and he settles back down. Moments later, they hear some music. Paul and Sophie go out to investigate, with Julie joining them. They realize the sound is coming from the basement. Julie recognizes it as Ron's ringtone. They descend the stairs cautiously and find Ron's phone on the table. Concerned, Paul asks Sophie and Julie to go back upstairs. As Paul inspects the phone, he discovers a burnt fragment beside it. Later, Julie asks Paul if they found Ron. Sophie replies that the police have begun their investigation. Sophie then requests Julie to ask Jana to feed Willie. Julie replies, Willie is sleeping, and Jana isn't upstairs before turning to leave. Paul stops her and asks, do you have Jana's diary? She initially denies it, but under Sophie's persistence, Julie reluctantly hands it over. As they inspect the diary, they discover a road map inside. Paul immediately recognizes it. It's identical to one he saw pinned on Arthur's board. He retrieves the map he took from Arthur's place. Comparing the two, they realize there's an underground passage connecting the mansion to the basement. Paul and Sophie head to the cellar, searching for a hidden door. After some time, Paul's lighter begins to flicker. Inspecting the wall, he spots a brick marked with a cross. He presses it, and a concealed door creaks open. Paul tells Sophie to stay outside and goes inside. He cautiously steps inside. Suddenly, Tommy rushes past him, vanishing into the darkness. As Paul moves ahead, he hears the eerie laughter of a child. Turning quickly, he catches a fleeting glimpse of Tommy darting behind him. When Paul turns back, Ron appears before him. Startled, Paul stumbles backward, his gaze falling on Ron's lifeless body sprawled on the ground. Insects buzz over Rana's face, feeding on decay. Determined, Paul steels himself and moves deeper inside. Then he starts hearing the whispers. As he looks inside, he spots Jana sitting with a phonograph. She pleads, "Don't kill anyone." A shadowy figure combs her hair. Jana murmurs, "I don't want them to die." Suddenly, Arthur appears, prompting Paul to point his gun at him. Arthur pleads urgently, "Be quiet. She will kill us." Paul asks, "Jana?" Arthur replies, "No, we need to leave now." Arthur leads Paul to a dimly lit space. Paul asks, "What is this place?" "It looks like an altar." Arthur explains, "I need to tell you about Mara. She is an evil spirit who haunts us in nightmares. In ancient times, people believed she was the goddess of death and worshipped her. This temple was built as a place for sacrificial offerings. Mara feeds on human souls, and children were often sacrificed because they are receptive." Paul says, "I'm not a child, but I've seen something too." Arthur replies, "That's her doing. Her whisper drags you into horror and then kills you." Paul asks, "What if you cover your ears and don't listen?" Arthur warns, "It won't help. Her whisper is already in your head. Only a powerful shock can break the nightmare. It's easier for her to haunt us because we saw her when we were so young." Paul questions, "You mean that day in the mansion?" Arthur says, "For years, she was in a deep sleep, until you woke her up." The scene shifts to past, where Sophie fell from the stairs. Paul checks her and finds her neck twisted unnaturally. Arthur asks, "Is she dead?" Paul replies, "Didn't you say the whisper can heal?" Arthur warns, "That's just a folk belief." Ignoring the warning, Paul picks up the phonograph. Arthur warns, "It could be cursed." Paul plays it anyway. As the eerie whisper fills the air, Mara materializes behind Paul. Arthur panics and flees. Moments later, Sophie gasps and comes back to life. "In present," Paul says, "it was that old witch's whisper." Arthur shakes his head and shows Paul an old photograph. "The old witch wasn't the whisperer," he explains. "She worshipped Mara." Arthur continues, "The woman was gravely ill. To prolong her life, she recorded Mara's whisper in the phonograph. But there was a price, human sacrifice. She offered her own granddaughter as the victim because only a life could pay for another life. Mara thrives on victims. She feeds on pain and despair. In that mansion, she killed everyone. Why one? She drove the old woman so mad that she hanged herself. but you started it all over again. Paul defends himself. I just cured Sophie, Arthur counters. You're wrong, Tommy. Nick's little brother wasn't hit by a car. Mara took him. In flashback, Tommy is seen hearing whisper, blood trickling from his ears. He seems possessed and bolts through the woods, running onto the road where a car hits him. He had been fleeing from something terrifying. In present, Paul presses. What about Jana? What was she doing down there? She was talking to someone or something. Arthur replies. It was Mara. We have to banish her and destroy that phonograph, Arthur insists. I can't do it alone, but together we can. Just then, a sound echoes through the basement, prompting them to hide. They watch as Jana approaches with the phonograph. Arthur sees the phonograph from her grasp. Jana warns, you need to leave. Mara will kill you. Paul restrains Arthur, preventing him from burning the phonograph. Arthur insists, we have to destroy it. This is Mara's gateway into our world. Paul snaps, if you burn it, my son will die, Arthur says. A life for a life, remember? Are you willing to pay that price to save your son? Suddenly, Jana announces, she's here. The lamp goes out and a haunting whisper reverberates through the air. Jana shouts, Mom, stop! But the whisper intensifies. They all clutch their ears as the oppressive sound grows louder. Paul slips into a disorienting vision. He's lying in a hospital bed, with Luke sitting in front. Overcome with emotion, Paul hugs him, but when he catches his reflection in a nearby mirror, he realizes it's not Luke. Panicking, Paul pulls out his gun, fires, and snaps back to reality. He sees Jana running off with the phonograph. Meanwhile, Nick makes a call to higher authorities. He reports, the situation is spiraling out of control. Detective Paul Novak, the one you sent to assist us, is distracted and drinks on duty. His superior's response chills him. We never sent anyone. Paul emerges from the basement, calling out for Sophie. The lights flicker erratically as he spots Sophie and Julie stuck on the ceiling. Jana, now possessed, stands nearby as objects levitate and crash to the ground. Paul shouts, let them go! Jana replies hauntingly, they deserve it. Paul insists, Mara is manipulating you. Would your mother do this? Jana snaps, my mother was always there for me. Paul says, showing her a photograph. Look, this isn't your mother. Jana screams, you're a liar! But Paul pleads, let them go. We can fix this. Jana collapses, and Sophie and Julie fall to the floor. Sophie rushes to Jana, embracing her and calming her down. Paul warns, this place is cursed. You all need to leave now. Later, Jana shares with Paul how it all began. She reveals, it started shortly after we moved here. Dad was still alive, and he moved Mom's belongings to the basement. I spent a lot of time down there. One day, I heard her voice calling me. I reached a place and found the phonograph. Jana continues, it kept calling, my little girl, play it. I'll tell you the words, just whisper, and I will return to you. I did everything the voice said. When I played the phonograph, the whisper began. In the mirror, I saw my mother. She said, Jana, I will always be with you. It felt like she had truly come back. Jana says, but when Mom killed Kevin, everything changed. After that, I didn't know what to do. That's why I went to talk to Sophie. Sophie responds, the evil has always been under our house. Why didn't it do anything before? Paul interjects, it awoke again when I played the phonograph. I left, but the evil waited for a new victim. By killing, Mara grows stronger, Jana laments. This is all my fault. Sophie comforts her. It's not your fault, Jana. I am sorry for leaving you alone. She gently instructs. Take care of Willie. Jana nods and leaves. Sophie then turns to Paul. What should we do now? You're coming with us, right? Paul hesitates. You go to the motel. I need to save my son. Sophie protests. But this is evil. Paul insists, it's my only chance. As Paul prepares to leave, he sees Tommy standing in front of his car. Paul murmurs, I am sorry, and Tommy vanishes. Suddenly, Nick appears, pulling Paul out and arresting him. You weren't assigned here. You were suspended. Why are you really here? Paul replies, the whisper from the phonograph. It's Mara, an evil spirit. She killed your brother. Nick shouts. Tommy was hit by a car. It was an accident. Sophie steps between them, supporting Paul. I saw the evil with my own eyes, Nick. Realizing the truth, Nick's demeanor shifts as tears stream down his face. I just wanted to bring him back, he confesses. Jack asks, what do you mean? Nick continues, Arthur told me the phonograph could bring Tommy back to life. I had to try. Nick recounts his experience. I went back to the mansion and found the phonograph. Arthur warned me. If I gave Tommy his life back, someone else would die. But I didn't care. I started the phonograph, but almost immediately, I felt sick. I realized it was wrong and turned the handle backward. Suddenly, everything stopped. I threw the phonograph down the chimney, hoping no one could ever use it again. Things were fine until you came back, and it all started again. Sophie says, "We have to leave this place." She goes inside to get the kids. She asks Julie, "Where are Jana and Willie?" Julie replies, "I don't know." Sophie realizes they are in the basement. Julie immediately calls Paul and Nick. They rush to the basement, and Paul realizes Jana has taken the phonograph too. In the basement, Jana, possessed, is seen preparing to set burn Willie. Paul intervenes, pulling her back. "Jana, stop." He struggles to free her from Mara's hold. Meanwhile, Sophie encounters Mara as she attempts to exit. Nick hurriedly reverses the phonograph handle. Mara vanishes into the void as Sophie escapes with Willie. Nick screams, "Set this thing on fire!" At that moment, Jana snaps out of her possession. Paul rushes toward the phonograph, but Mara's force hurls him backward. Nick, haunted by Mara's terrifying presence, collapses to the ground. Jana grabs the phonograph. Trembling, Paul urges, "Give it to me." Suddenly, Mara speaks in her mother's voice, pleading, "Jana, give me the phonograph." Jana hesitates, looking into the mirror and seeing Mara's true form reflected back. She throws the phonograph to Paul. Mara manifests before Paul, tormenting him with haunting whispers. He is transported to a vision in a hospital where Luke lies unconscious in front of him. As Paul opens the phonograph, he sees Mara's reflection inside it. Luke's heartbeat monitor flatlines. Paul declares, "I know what you are doing, but I started this, and I'll pay the price. I'll be the one to end it." Paul says sorry to Luke and plays the phonograph backwards. He shifts back to the reality. He shouts, "Jana, run!" Then set himself and the phonograph ablaze. The flames consume both as Mara's whispers fade into silence. Later, Luke is seen regaining consciousness in the hospital. Sophie and Jana prepare to leave. Jana asks, "Will you miss this house?" Sophie replies, "We will start over in a new place, in the city, and this time everything will be different." Jana says, "I am so sorry about Paul. He saved me not just from death, but from something much worse." Sophie nods. "Yeah, he was a good man." She steps inside to finish packing. Julie, gathering her things, picks up Willie's teddy bear from the cot. As she holds it, faint whispers emanate from the toy. The screen cuts to black, marking the end of the movie. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the chills, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a scare. Until next time, stay spooky.